What you are about to hear is a story that has been building for months. A story about two men, two very different men, who are now on a collision course that nobody in the royal world saw coming. And when you hear what Spencer Johnson said and what Harry did next, you will understand why this is the most explosive royal story of 2026. Hello, friends. My name is James, and you are watching Royal Daily Report, your number one source for the most exclusive and most shocking royal stories on the internet. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now because tonight we are going deeper than we have ever gone before. And if you have been with us from the beginning, you already know. We never stop. We never hold back. Let us get into it. Spencer Johnson is not a name that most people outside royal circles would have known 2 years ago. He was a commentator, a royal observer, someone who appeared on panels and gave quotes to newspapers and built a following by saying the things that other people were too cautious to say. He was sharp, he was articulate, and he had a gift for finding the most painful angle on any story and pressing on it with precision. And for a while, that gift made him interesting, made him someone worth listening to. But somewhere along the way, interesting became cruel, observant became personal, and Spencer Johnson went from royal commentator to something else entirely. He became the man who made it his mission to take Harry apart, piece by piece, interview by interview, statement by statement, until Harry, a man who has faced the British press for his entire life, a man who has been written about and photographed and scrutinized since before he could walk, had finally had enough. Tonight we are telling the full story of Spencer Johnson versus Prince Harry. How it started, how it escalated, what Johnson said that crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, what Harry did in response that shocked everyone who thought they knew how this story would go, and what is coming next, because sources close to both sides are telling us that this is nowhere near over. This is Royal Daily Report, and this is the fight that is about to change everything. To understand how this started, you have to go back to the beginning of Spencer Johnson's public commentary on Harry and Meghan. In the early days, Johnson was measured. He was critical, but fair. He questioned decisions. He raised legitimate points about the couple's relationship with the press, about the timing of their various statements, about the contradictions between their stated desire for privacy and their very public media presence. And those early critiques, while uncomfortable for Harry's supporters, were within the bounds of reasonable commentary. They were the kinds of things that thoughtful people could disagree about, the kinds of things that Harry himself, in his more honest moments, might have acknowledged had some validity. But then something changed. The commentary became sharper, more personal, more targeted. Johnson began to move beyond Harry's decisions and into Harry's character, beyond what Harry had done and into who Harry was. And that shift, that move from critique to character assassination, is where this story really begins. Because when you spend enough time publicly dismantling a person's character, publicly questioning their motives, publicly suggesting that everything they do is calculated and dishonest and self-serving, eventually that person is going to respond. And when that person is Prince Harry, a man who has spent his entire life being written about by people who did not know him and did not care to know him, the response, when it finally came, was not small. Johnson made several appearances across British media in late 2025 and early 2026 that sources close to Harry describe as the turning point. In one television appearance, Johnson suggested that Harry's relationship with his children was itself a performance, that the public displays of fatherhood, the school runs, the Invictus events, the interviews where Harry spoke about Archie and Lilibet, were calculated image management rather than genuine emotion. That Harry had weaponized his children the same way he had weaponized his grief and his trauma and his relationship with his mother. That nothing Harry did was real. That everything was a transaction. Those words landed differently than anything Johnson had said before. Because this was not about the institution. This was not about security arrangements or memoir revelations or the rights and wrongs of leaving royal life. This was about a father and his children, and a suggestion that the love between them was manufactured for public consumption. And that, according to every source close to Harry, was the moment Harry stopped being able to stay silent. People who know Harry have described his reaction to those comments with a consistency that tells you how deep they cut. He was not angry in the way he had been angry about other attacks. He was not frustrated or irritated or ready to fire back with a statement. He was something quieter and more dangerous than angry. He was done. Done with absorbing. Done with letting it go. Done with the advice from lawyers and advisors who told him that responding only amplified the story. Because some things, Harry had decided, are worth amplifying. Some lines, once crossed, require a response. And a man publicly suggesting that Harry's love for his children is fake was one of those lines. What Harry did next was not what anyone expected. He did not call a press conference. He did not release a statement through a publicist. He did not go on a television interview and respond with carefully managed emotion. What he did was quieter and more deliberate and, in many ways, more powerful than any of those things. He began documenting, gathering, building a case, not through lawyers initially, though lawyers would come later, but through a process of careful, methodical, private preparation. Sources describe Harry becoming very focused in this period. Very calm. The kind of calm that people who know him say is more significant than any outburst. Because Harry's anger burns hot and then passes. But Harry's calm, when it comes after something that has genuinely crossed a line, tends to last and to lead somewhere. The legal dimension of this story emerged in March 2026 when it became known that Harry's legal team had sent a formal communication to Spencer Johnson and to the broadcasters who had platformed his most extreme comments. The communication was not a traditional cease and desist. It was something more targeted. It laid out, in precise detail, the specific claims Johnson had made that Harry's team considered to be false and damaging. It identified the broadcasts and publications in which those claims had appeared, and it made clear that Harry was prepared to pursue every available legal avenue to address what his team described as a sustained and deliberate campaign of defamation. This was not a warning shot. This was the opening move of someone who had made a decision and was not going to be talked out of it. Johnson's response, through his own representatives, was defiant. He maintained that everything he had said was fair commentary, that his observations about Harry were grounded in publicly available information and constituted legitimate public interest journalism. That Harry, as a public figure who had himself chosen to enter the public debate through memoirs and interviews and documentary series, had reduced his own expectation of privacy and commentary, and that any legal action would be vigorously defended. Johnson went further. He gave an interview in which he addressed Harry's legal move directly and said something that sources say made Harry's team immediately take note. He said that if Harry wanted to make this public, he was ready to make it public, that he had material he had not yet published, that there were things he knew about Harry and Meghan and their time in the royal family that the world had not yet heard, and that a legal case would give him the platform to say all of it. That statement, that threat, because that is what it was, created a new dimension to this story. Because now it was not just about what Johnson had already said. It was about what Johnson was claiming he could still say. And the question that everyone around Harry began asking was whether pursuing this legally was worth the risk of opening that door. Whether the vindication of a legal victory was worth whatever Johnson might put into the public record during the process of getting there. And Harry's answer to that question, according to sources, was characteristically direct. He said that he was not going to make decisions based on what someone else threatened to reveal, that he had spent enough of his life modifying his behavior because of what the press might say or do, that he was done with that, and that if Johnson had something to say, he should say it, and then Harry's lawyers would deal with it. By April 2026, this had become the most talked about royal legal dispute since Harry's phone hacking case. Commentators across British media were divided. Some said Harry was right to push back, that there is a difference between legitimate criticism and the kind of sustained personal attacks that Johnson had been making, that characterizing a father's love for his children as fake is not commentary, it is cruelty, and that public figures have the same right as anyone else to defend their reputation against false and damaging claims. Others said Harry was making a mistake, that engaging legally only amplified Johnson's profile, that every court filing, every legal development, every statement from either side would generate the kind of press coverage that Harry had always said he wanted to escape, that the best response to someone like Spencer Johnson was silence. that engaging with him elevated him. Harry's position, as communicated through sources close to him, was that this debate, fight back or stay silent, respond or ignore, was itself part of the problem. That the advice to stay silent had been given to Harry his entire life. By the palace, by advisors, by lawyers, by people who had his best interests at heart and who were also, in their own way, asking him to absorb things that should not have to be absorbed. That the strategy of silence had protected the institution more than it had protected Harry, and that he was no longer in the business of protecting the institution. He was in the business of protecting his family and his children, and the truth about who he is as a father. Because that is what this ultimately comes down to. Not the institution, not the legal technicalities, not the debate about whether Harry is right or wrong to pursue this. It comes down to a father who was told in public by a man with a platform and an audience that his love for his children is a performance, and who decided that some things cannot go unanswered, that some accusations are so fundamental, so personal, so targeted at the thing that matters most, that staying silent about them is not dignity. It is surrender. And Harry, whatever else you think about him, is not someone who surrenders when the fight is about something real. The case is ongoing as of July 2026. No court date has been set. Negotiations between legal teams continue. And Spencer Johnson continues to appear in British media. Those sources say his comments about Harry have become more carefully worded since the legal communication arrived. The defiant public persona is still there, but the specific, targeted attacks on Harry's character as a father have become notably less frequent. Which tells you something. Which tells you that legal pressure, even at this early stage, has had an effect. That the man who said he was ready to make everything public has become slightly more cautious about what he actually puts on the record. Harry arrives in Britain in July for the Invictus events. Spencer Johnson is based in Britain. Whether their paths cross publicly, whether this simmering legal and personal conflict produces a moment that the cameras catch, nobody knows. What sources close to Harry say is that he is not thinking about Johnson when he thinks about July. He is thinking about his father. He is thinking about the Invictus veterans. He is thinking about coming back to a country that is complicated for him in ways that go deeper than any single commentator or any single legal case. But he is also, those same sources say, a man who has made a decision, who has drawn a line, who has said clearly and without ambiguity that there are things he will no longer absorb in silence. And Spencer Johnson, who spent months testing that line, has now discovered exactly where it is. There is a version of this story where it ends quietly, where legal teams reach an agreement behind closed doors, where Johnson issues a clarification and Harry withdraws the legal action and the whole thing fades from the headlines. That version is possible. People who cover royal legal stories say it is actually the most likely outcome. These things often settle. They often find a quiet resolution that neither side fully announces and that the press moves on from within a news cycle or two. But there is another version. A version where this goes further, where the case proceeds, where the things Johnson said he was ready to reveal become part of a public legal record, where Harry and his team respond to each of those revelations in open court, where everything gets aired in the most public way possible. And that version, messy, expensive, unpredictable, potentially damaging to both sides, is also possible. Because Harry has made clear that he is not backing down, and Johnson has made clear that he is not either. And when two people who are both absolutely convinced they are right refuse to move, courts are what happens next. What we know for certain tonight is this. A man who was born into the most watched family in the world and who has spent his entire life being written about and commented on and analyzed and criticized has finally, at the age of 41, decided that there is a line, that he knows where it is, and that he is willing to fight, legally, publicly, at whatever cost, to defend what is on his side of it. The love he has for his children, the truth of who he is as a father, the one thing that all of the noise and all of the commentary and all of the years of public scrutiny have never been able to touch. Until Spencer Johnson tried, and discovered that some things in Harry's life are no longer available to be touched without consequences. That is all for tonight, friends. I am James, and this has been Royal Daily Report. If this story hit different for you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you have not already and turn on those notifications because we are covering every single development in this story as it happens. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and stay royal. Goodbye, friends.